Okay, everybody, let's start. Let's start the show. Welcome to our WCA event in partnership with SensorWorks, and Ido will take over the moderation. You will see more in a few minutes. So welcome to our first event of our IoT application series, moving people and things safely in the COVID area. Me, Peter Walter, I have the fancy title of the president of the WCA, Wireless Communication Alliance. You see my credentials there. If you have any questions, if you want to join our club or organization, please ping me. More information you will see under wca.org. Try to get the next page. Here we are. So who are we right now? So we were founded in 1994. And we are a non-profit business league dedicated to providing education, awareness, connectivity, and community to the wireless industry, starting in Silicon Valley, but now with Zoom, thanks God or not so good, worldwide. So we have people everywhere in the world joining our team and our meetings also. Here the board, a quick view, Peter Walter, me, the president. Then we have Jeremy Toll, the vice president. We have Tom Hunt, treasurer. Tom Hunt is happy to take your donation and sponsorships, so if you will. Tom Mitchell is our secretary. Then our three directors are Jeff Yen, Tom Rao, and Andy Doe. Andy just joined a few days ago. Our admin, the best what we have here in our team is Christine Courtieu. And marketing communication, Armin Musavi, he is making all these fancy videos which you may have seen on LinkedIn and other social medias. Thanks to our sponsors, we can keep our mission alive in sponsoring students on university to bring them to the wireless industry. That is our main task and focus since 1994. There are more. Too many to mention, but not enough. Having said this, please donate through wca.org or directly with PayPal on accounts paypal.com. Any amount can help to keep, like I said, our mission alive in sponsoring students on university to go into the wireless industry. A little bit housekeeping. We are almost there. Please use the Zoom chat section for questions. The presentations and recordings will be made available within 48 hours on our websites and also on our YouTube channel. Again, greetings to the world and thanks for being our guest. So we have a guest this time because of the time from Europe and also Middle East. Unfortunately, Japan or Singapore, it's a little bit too early unless they are coming from the bars right now. And like always, entertainment brought you by the Midnight Ramblers. If you want to order them online, offline, here's the Facebook link. And Andy, who is a moderator, is also the leader of that gang. And here, a COVID-19 picture from the rehearsal of their shows.
Breaking. Ciao.
Please switch off your microphones. We try to do this also from our administration, but please switch it off. Yeah. Upcoming events, moving people and things safely in the COVID area. That is right now as we speak. Purpose of this live here today. The next one is end of January, Spectrum 2021. What's happening with the focus on the Spectrum applications and focusing on 5G and what the spectrum is bringing with the auctions, what can we do with 5G and other frequencies. In February, we have 6G, whichever that is and whatever that is, dedicated to 110 gigahertz and above. Marty Cooper will be there also, one of the panelists, and we will have a virtual book signing event based around his book. Other events will come in 2021, including but not limited to wireless power, semiconductors, test equipments, industrial IoT, of course, and then 5G, the never-ending story. We will see. If you have other proposals, something on your mind, on your heart, we are open-minded. There's always room for an event, what we can squeeze in, dedicated to a certain wireless related topic. With this, I hand over to our good friend and partner, Mitchell Gollner, from IoT Nation. He may have a few words, a few minutes to introduce his companies and his services. I stop sharing here. Mitchell, just take over.
Okay, great. Thank you, Peter. And thank you to the WCA. You guys have been great partners. And I'm here to talk for a few minutes on how can you scale your IoT business. This first page is showing a map of some of the companies that we track within IoT Nation. So IoT ACE solves business problems. For marketing people, you may be asking, how do I ensure that I'm spending money in the right places, at the right conferences, in the right organizations, and how do we increase my company's visibility? As a salesperson, you may be asking, how do I find and prioritize prospects so that I can pursue bigger deals with bigger returns? And as a business development person, you may be asking, which company should you partner with so that they best complement your company's mission, products, or services? And if you're an investment professional and you're looking to invest or in M&A, which companies do you invest in or acquire that excel in specific verticals, technologies, or use cases? And so we built IoT ACE in order to answer questions for these personas. And I'm going to show you the application. And at the end of this, we'll give you a code that you can try out the application yourself. But for example, you can sort on any verticals that you want. We have a whole variety of verticals. And then you can delve into a specific company where you can find out about the company, find out the verticals and technologies that they're in, conferences that they participated in, industry groups that they're members of, or could be a founding member or a contributor, as well as corporate ecosystems. And in addition, we have contacts and Twitter information. And so there's lots of data there that you can do a contextual sell. Further, you can do research on use cases. So you can find various use cases within IoT and help to identify the companies that are putting together those use cases. There's lots more data in iotnation.com that you can explore, and I'm going to give you a code here in just a second. Okay, so the code is here, WCA 500, and I'll put that in the chat box in just a minute. But just as a summary, we track over 25,000 companies in the IoT ecosystem, and we also track use cases, contacts, virtual events, and more. And back to you, Peter. Thank you.
Okay, Peter?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you so much, Mitchell. So I really recommend try it out. I was really interested, especially when you're in this business of IoT. It would really make sense. So let's continue with our event. Not much to say. Thank you very much for being our guest again, participating in our event. I'm handing over to Andy. After, I wish you happy holidays and also happy new year. We will see you next year again. In between, shoot us an email, shoot us information, requests. And now, Andy, it's your turn with your wonderful show, Moderate Well. And we will welcome Andy Doe as moderator, and Akain, and also Paul Comfort, who tell us how to move things and people safely in this COVID area.
Great.
Up to you.
Thank you.
Sharing, Andy, is you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, if you can leave that slide on for a bit.
Oh, sorry.
No problem. But yes, hello everyone. Thank you, Mitchell, for intro IoT Nation. That is really a wonderful resource for all things IoT. It's kind of the definitive yellow pages of IoT, if you will. Yeah, when I was asked to start kind of an IoT application series, one thing came to mind is, what topic is really relevant? And there's really only one topic that matters this year, and one word that matters. It's COVID, right? And with that, I thought about what industries were most affected by that. And if you look at where companies and manufacturers having to adjust and cities adjust, there's two areas that I felt were most affected, and that's supply chain and public transit. So moving things have gotten more challenging, of course, with the protocols and fewer workers in manufacturing, and moving people has been challenging just because, as you can see, public transit and buses and rails have seen a huge drop off in ridership, and based on rules and regulations at the safety measures in place. So with that, I went to seek out the leaders and who are the voices in these two sectors. And I am pleased to have found the queen and king of their industry. They have a great background and venue of sectors. So with that, I'd like to welcome Hannah Kane from Alom Technologies and Paul Comfort from Trapeze Group. So thank you both for joining, and look forward for your wisdom today. And before we begin, just a reminder on the housekeeping, please put your questions in the chat room. We'll try to get to them through the speakers as they go through their presentations, as well as towards the end, we'll have a segment for Q&A as well. So with that, I'd like to hand over the mic to Hannah Kane of Alom Technologies. Hannah, welcome.
Thank you so much. And first of all, I want to thank Andy and the WCA for inviting me to be here today. It's my pleasure to talk about how to move things in the COVID area. So first, a word about Alom. So Alom is a global supply chain company, and to give you an idea about what that is, think about us as an advanced fulfillment company, light contract manufacturer, materials company, and a technology company. Mix all of that together and you get a full service company that can take materials all the way from the very inception through production and out to the end user. We are very active in a number of industries, technology, automotive, medical, pharma, utilities, finance. Obviously, this year, medical and pharma have been key industries for us. Right now, we are shipping a fair amount of the COVID-19 testing kits that's out there. So right now we are up producing and shipping close to 1 million kits per week. So it will give you an idea about the type of ramp that companies in this area have been experiencing. So we are headquartered in the innovation corridor of Silicon Valley in Fremont, California. That's our global headquarters. We have our EMEA activities are managed out of the Amsterdam, Netherlands, and our APAC activities out of Hong Kong. You see some of our fundamentals in the bubbles. I won't go into them because I know how important it is for everybody to move on to the actual substance. So supply chain, when we say supply chain, we're all thinking about physical products. So we are thinking about procuring products. We're thinking about producing them. We're thinking about getting them out to the distribution. But so the physical supply chain doesn't stand alone. It's got a digital supply chain to support it. And sometimes the digital supply chain is the leading supply chain. So it's tracking, it's compliance. It's also in-factory visibility, traceability. And then, of course, it's everything that goes on as product goes out to the end user. So there's a lot going on in the digital supply chain. Sometimes, as I said, it's also leading because the supply chain could consist of getting you a digital product. You know that when you download product, it's actually also a supply chain when it's done just via digital delivery. And then, of course, there's a financial supply chain. So that could be things like paying for stuff, figuring out the currency, the customs tariffs, what value is out there, etc. And one of the key things that we are doing is keeping these parallel. Very important stuff is to keep it parallel. And this is part of what the trick has been this year. So just a quick look at what happens before you go out and get things on the shelf down in the right-hand corner. The product has gone through a lot of different stages, and there's a lot of different activities that can impact it. Obviously, the pandemic that's highlighted here has been the key area for this year, but there's a lot of other things to take into account. And these things have not gone away just because we have a pandemic. They're still there, from natural disasters. Hey, here in California, where I'm speaking to you from, we had huge fires, etc. So these type of things still are there. So the pandemic was sort of just an overlay on that. So when I look at the pandemic, what's a big shift? Most people would think it's supply, but that's actually not the big shift. This big shift that happened during the pandemic and still is happening is a demand shift. So we all buy different products. And there's a puzzle because I was telling Paul, who did my slides, that hey, for the first time ever, my husband and I did a puzzle together, and it's a very common thing happening, that our demands have shifted. We are doing more home improvement. We are doing more coziness. You know, Christmas decorations are in short supply right now because a lot of people want to decorate their house more, etc. So there's been this big demand shift, and it's not just been product. So product has been a big thing, and psychologists will tell you that some of the stuff we're buying that's typical for people under stress. We want to buy certain things when we're under stress. But it's also been, of course, a channel shift, right? So we are all getting way more boxes delivered to our doorstep. We don't go out to the retail channel nearly as much as we used to. We don't feel comfortable. Maybe they're even closed, etc. And we don't go to what we call institutional places and have our consumption there. So, for instance, we don't go to a restaurant and eat in the restaurant, or we don't go to a hotel and use their toilet tissue. Right? The big toilet tissue discussion that we had and still have actually is that all the packaging was done for it was done for institutions, and this is made on big equipment, and shifting it over for personal consumption is not necessarily so darn easy. So this is really the big pandemic change that has happened. Of course, there's also been a supply disruption, right? And the supply disruption has been on multiple levels. We have had some factories shut down, but the biggest one has really been in transportation. So a couple of things in transportation. Most cargo is has moved on planes, on passenger planes, and in the cargo bays. As those passenger planes got canceled, all of a sudden we had a shortage of the cargo space. And so that's where we see the delays and a lot of increased pricing between the different parts of the world. We also see a problem with truck drivers. Like everybody else, truck drivers have school-aged kids, and parents, they need to look more after under these circumstances, etc. And some of them, frankly, are concerned about moving around and doing trucking. And if we go outside the US, We are seeing a lot of disruptions at border crossings. In Africa, it's not unusual for a truck driver to wait 10 days to cross a border because you need to get a COVID test kit and be tested before they let you in. So you sit there in a queue for 10 days, maybe with your food on the truck, trying to get across the border, and there can be multiple borders you need to cross. So by the time you're there, it may not be so easy to have a product that's actually at that point of time edible or safe in any way, shape, or form. So yes, there's been supply disruption also. And then of course there's been some extraordinary demands on the supply chain now, as you know, we are seeing it in terms of the COVID test kits. That of course, given the test volume we are doing in the US right now, is a tremendous effort. But we also have the vaccine, and the vaccine, of course, as most of us know, the 2 vaccines that right now have been approved require very cold storage. It is a problem that the US generally has a very old infrastructure in the cold storage area, and especially for this level of vaccine, of requirements for this vaccine. However, it's been built out in very, very short order. So I think I doubt that the supply chain per se is going to be the big limiter on the vaccine distribution, but it has been and continues to be a challenge. So kudos to all the people who have stepped up on the vaccine side. But 2020, as we look at it, has, of course, we're all focused on the coronavirus, but there's been other things impacting the supply chain that has maybe been as forceful, and that is all the geopolitics and nationalism that we have seen. So it's gotten way, way more difficult to cross borders today. And it's not just the US. So if you think about Brexit, and you probably read some of the front page articles on Brexit, those negotiations are just about to break down, and it's going to be very challenging for many companies in Europe as these negotiations are going on. There's a lot of international upheaval. It impacts funds transfers. The list of prohibited parties where we can send product legally to and from really up in the air. Lots of tariff fluctuations. So there's a question about, can you get product at all? But if you can get product, what is it going to actually cost? And then you've got border disputes where, you know, not only is the poor truck driver sitting there with the load, but sometimes they get turned around. So it's a real tough situation. So of course, what we all want is to have visibility, traceability. Right, and one of the advices I've said, and this is now getting to how does technology help this situation, will data help this situation, is the more upheaval we have, the more difficult it is to plan, but the more important it is to get data really, really fast. The faster and more reliable data you can have, the more agility you have, the better you can respond. So supply chain is hugely complex. It's one of the most complex areas in the world right now. And so getting those actionable data, the reliable data faster sounds really good, but it's very complex. So we all work on dashboards, control towers, trying to understand what's going on, both on the inbound material. Are we going to get the material such that we can produce? What do we have under our roof and as it's going on? So the visibility we need has a number of different requirements. I'm going to go into that in a second. So if we look at a typical situation where we are looking at, okay, which data do we get here while things are in transit? It could be data that means that we don't lose assets while we are transporting. It could save fuel costs because we are better at figuring out where things go, cash flow, on-time delivery, temperature, environmental stability. So this is a very generic chart about things that are important as stuff are in transit. But if we look at how does this relate to COVID, of course, the problem is that the demand shift happens so fast that maybe we need to redirect while we are in transit. So demand shift, as I said, it could be product related, but it could also be channel related where we wanted to, and it could be geography related. So we want to send it to a different location. And so that is why we can possibly save fuel cost, and by having the visibility while we are in transit, we can get that agility that we are looking at. The other thing that's very important sensor-wise is, of course, the temperature and the environmental stability. So we were just talking about the virus having certain requirements for temperature, sensitivity, etc. So these are the type of things that we can measure. And being able to measure these in transit is really important. So that is one example for you. Another really important thing that is still in the works, not really good, is being able to see where we are out of stock. So right now, if a retailer is out of stock on something, we discover it by somebody, a store clerk, going out and taking a look at the shelf. But here, what we have is actually a shelf that can measure whether it's out and send a signal to the manufacturer or the distributor saying this shelf is out. And now we can start looking at doing some demand planning. So if we look at what is it sensors really do, and what is it that we get from sensors, it's data. The question is, what are we using this data for? Right? And so this is a more conceptual thing, is when we get a lot of descriptive data, what happened. And that is what we are dealing with right now. We do get a little bit of diagnostic, which is why did it happen? We don't get enough predictive. And as we are dealing with all this complexity, what we really need to do is get into predictive data such that we can see what's going to happen in the future, get closer to the action without us sitting there and turning the dial in a manual manner. And then, of course, the entire idea is eventually to get to the prescriptive, where you get much more decision support and possibly decision automation. So I've been thinking over time about, okay, how does this, how do data, IoT, sensors relate into supply chain or to business, right? And there are a number of different areas where supply chain are big customers of data. So anytime somebody purchases something, we want to know when, where, why, what's going on. We also want to know whether things are being returned, which, by the way, seen from a supply chain standpoint, is a real disaster and very expensive because it's so expensive to get returns. We want to see how are people using it. And this is again where sensors that are in product are really important, so we can see how frequently is this used, how many times did we open the refrigerator door, what was the duration of the exercise we did, how much did the pulse go up, did the equipment fail, etc. So we can use that for a lot of different things: product development, cross-selling, replenishment, replacement, things like that. We want to see which results came, and that could be warnings, and it could be accomplishments, changes, etc. We want to use that for cross-selling, etc. Environment. Now we are getting again to the very important part with the vaccine. So we want to know location, temperature, humidity, expiration lots. And generally, pharma is a very big customer in that space, but anybody who does anything chemical or anything that can change are very big customers in the environmental space. So of course there's compliance management, but there's also stock circulation. This is part of what we do, making sure that we do a first in, first out, warehouse management, etc. And then finally, I think many people are very focused on this, is a status that could be maintenance status, repairs, etc. And so that's where you get into the maintenance repair operation, you get into parts inventory, things like that. So supply chain generally is a very big customer of data and of sensors. Looking at where we are at the journey, right now we are still getting a lot of data feedback from product diagnostics, but we are not really high on this curve here with demand predictive. And of course, part of the problem we are having is we are having demand shift. See, in the old days, stepping back in the old days, manufacturers would manufacture a product and then they would send it out in the channel and then it would be bought. Today, with the demand shift we are seeing, this is not so easy. Instead, the manufacturer needs to be in an iterative process with the consumer demand. And so the best companies out there use sentiment analysis. They see what people post on Facebook or wherever people post, and they use that to do predictive analysis. Still in its infancy, and I have not seen anybody do really effective predictive analysis that has helped with the demand shift here. It's done in a manual manner. But this is a journey that we are seeing that is coming in supply chain, and that maybe will help some of you as you are doing your product development. Some of the areas that I'm using or watching right now is, apart from obviously the cybersecurity, and we all know the cybersecurity risk has gone up tremendously with COVID, right? And maybe I should stop and say why. It's because companies are much easier to deceive these days because we are not sitting in the same offices and there's so much unusual happening that it's much easier to deceive people, to click on things and be subject to ransomware, etc., etc. Areas I watch is, of course, artificial intelligence, freight controls, demand sensing, those type of things. Blockchain. I think blockchain is still way out in the future. I'm following it, but I think it will be quite some time before it becomes relevant to most companies. And the reason I'm saying this, and I don't know whether there are any blockchain fans on the call, is that the ecosystem that needs to be around the blockchain still needs to be built. And I don't think that that is going to happen unless we've got government and international collaboration. And that is probably still 5 to 10 years out. So while the technology exists,
Sorry to interrupt. There was a question, and also we want to be respectful of the time. There was a question that from someone here that says that a topic like AI and ML to solve these data problems, and here you're using or you recognize the ABC, which is great. Do you feel the supply chain industry is ahead, or you thinking ahead? Do you feel that that industry needs to catch up and do all the AI and cloud things that other industries are using?
I feel the industry is keeping up with the tools out there, but I also feel that over the last until 5 years ago, we had a decade, 15 years ago to 5 years ago, we had a decade where complexity in the supply chain clearly was outrunning technology. So technology could not keep up. Right now, technology is starting to catch up, but the complexity is just tremendous in supply chain.
Yeah, we'll have
So-
some questions.
So wrapping up, of course, connectivity. And then I just want to say, of course, there's a lot of challenges going on as we are working through this. So with that, Andy, thank you for the reminder on the time, and I'm open for questions and look forward to hearing from Paul.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, there's so much more to supply chain than just moving boxes, right? And in COVID, there's a lot of things to think about. So please put in your questions in the chat box. But thank you for that, Hannah. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Paul Comfort, who's kind of a celebrity in the realms of public transit. He has a #1 selling book, and he certainly has an awesome podcast called the Transit Unplugged. And I'm a follower and a fanboy of Paul, and I'm really honored to have him on today. And again, public transit, Paul, has taken a little bit of a hit with COVID for good reasons and things. So love to get your view on what's the state of public transit. So to that, love to give you the microphone. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Andy, and great presentation, Hannah. Great to hear some about what's happening in the world of logistics. Today, as Andy said, I'm going to talk about public transportation. That's my background and career. I've spent over 30 years in the industry, ended up as CEO of the MTA in Baltimore, running the subway, the light rail, the bus system, and commuter train service and bus service into Washington, D.C. And now I'm vice president of the world's largest transportation technology company, Trapeze. And for instance, about 70% of the major transit systems in North America have some of our products and services. The big news today when it comes to transportation is that President-elect Biden has appointed Mayor Pete Buttigieg as the new Secretary of Transportation. And I watched his introductory speech today with Biden, and he talked about infrastructure and jobs and union equity and the climate. And so he's a rising star for the Democratic Party. And I think this is a great way to give him some national attention and exposure, and we'll see what comes next for him. I did have the opportunity last night in my role as president of the North American Transit Alliance to meet with the Biden Transportation Transition Team. And we discussed transportation funding and regulations that are coming out of the new administration. We hope that are friendly to kind of using technology and contracting to help promote transit. You may be aware that right now in Washington, D.C., there is juggling over the Emergency Coronavirus Relief Act. And the one that has the most support right now looks like it will include $15 billion of assistance to the transit industry. And that's important because many major transit systems have announced almost a shutdown of 20 to 40% of their service starting in the new year unless they get this emergency relief. And why is that? Why do they need that? Well, we know what happened, right? Coronavirus hit. We had a 50 to 95% ridership reduction. 95% being on the commuter services, being the white collar workers, not going into the cities to work anymore. As a result of that, transit agencies reduced their routes to meet the demand. Many of them moved to rear door boarding because they didn't want people to be interacting with the driver or vice versa with the germs, et cetera. As a result of not using the front door, people could not go by the fare box. And so they waived fares, and that yet cleaning services were ramped up. So we saw a reduction in revenue and ridership and an increase in costs. And what happens? Well, they're out of money. And the federal government did get involved here in the US and Canada and in other countries. In Canada, for the first time ever, the administration in Ottawa decided to assist in matching funds with what the provinces would put toward operating dollars. Up until now, they've only been involved in capital. Here in the US, the first COVID Relief Act, actually the third one, included $25 billion for transit, which helped cover up the losses on the fare box. Many transit agencies have about a 25% recovery ratio on their fare box for buses. And so a quarter of their income comes through them. And without that, they could not continue operating too much longer. But now that money's mostly been spent by the major services, New York, Washington, D.C., Denver, all these major cities have announced draconian cuts unless they get that funding. We're hoping that'll come this week. What have some of the agencies done to respond to this? Well, they've moved to contactless payment solutions, which is right up the wireless industry's alley, right? So using your phone now, you can book a trip, pay for a trip by using contactless on-demand applications, the same thing, where you can book your trip with on-demand common payment platforms and mobility as a service applications. You may have heard of the term MaaS. That's basically putting all of a city's mobility services on one app. So it's not only the transit, bus and light rail and subway, but it's also taxi, Uber, Lyft, scooters, bikes, Zip rental cars, micro transit, all on one application. The city of Denver allowed Uber to kind of lead on that. The city of Dallas took the lead themselves, and they're the model now in the US for mobility as a service. And the fourth thing they did, obviously, was social distancing. One of the big trends coming out of this is that agencies now want to get real-time occupancy information out on their GTFS real-time feed for folks to look at their phone. They can see, hey, is that bus full? They can tell now if it's full. That's a big trend right now. Other big trends are using public health data for operations decision support. What do I mean by that? Not only mask, but social distancing. Many transit agencies are still not allowing full buses. They're keeping every other seat open, et cetera, and they're using the public health data to support those operational decisions. This information came from a study that was done by APTA, the American Public Transit Association, where they asked public transit agencies across America, what are you doing right now? And the third one was to create a more robust data management platform to support flexible dynamic operations environments. So, and these are some of the ways they're doing that: real-time passenger information on electronic passenger counting, monitoring density, entry points, showing the distance requirements on platforms. Again, all this has wireless applications. That's why I put it into the presentation for you all. Some of the big trends in 2020 that we came in with are also trends going out of 2021. I pulled this information from my podcast where I interview transit CEOs. Transit Unplugged, our podcast, is the #1 transit podcast in the world, where we interview transit CEOs. We're heard in 99 countries. Right now, we're focusing on Africa. Next month, we'll have a focus on the Middle East. The CEO of the Dubai transit system is my guest on our first show. And then we'll be focusing on the United Kingdom with the head of the rail system there, and then the head of the Ireland transit system just told me today she'd like to be on the show, so we'll have that. Some of the big trends, as you can see here, as we've already talked about, are curb and street management, car-free city centers, congestion charging like London does, Los Angeles wants to do, New York wants to do. That's charging people over a wireless application, right? You drive into the city during the peak periods, and coming off of your license plate or your mechanism on your car, they're called all different things, right? But it's a tolling facility mechanism. It'll tap that and charge you $10, let's say, to go into the city between 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. on weeknights, let's say. And that's already happening in London. It helps fund public transportation. It's a big new trend that the wireless providers, I think, probably already know about, but it's happening. Another big one is curb and street management. Specifically, in many cities now, because so many things have been delivered, they've even broken off their curbs to say, in this spot we'll have buses, and this spot we'll have taxis and limos and Ubers and Lyfts. In this section we'll have food delivery, and in this section we'll have package delivery. So we were talking about logistics, and many cities now are managing their curb to that level. On the technology side, microtransit has really become a major trend. What is microtransit? It basically is a personalized service to come either to your curb or your door and pick you up. So for instance, an example would be in Washington, D.C., my good friend Paul Wiedefeld, who's CEO, in the peak of the pandemic, had to cut some transit routes after 9 p.m. because there wasn't much ridership. But yet nurses and doctors and medical technicians still needed to get to their work on the night shift. So the city contracted with VIA, one of these microtransit companies, so you could push a button on your phone when you're ready to get your ride. If you were a nurse, it would triangulate your location. You'd go out and stand on the curb where it told you to, and this microtransit vehicle will come by and pick you up and take you and your other cohorts to the doctor after 9 o'clock, to the hospitals, so you could do your shifts. Autonomous vehicles are a big trend. Mobile fare payments, as we already mentioned. Wearables, which they're doing in Vancouver, Canada, which are bracelets that have a chip in them, which work just like really a credit card or a multi-use card, but it's a chip on your bracelet or your necklace. Positive train control is a big event happening here in the US. We're almost done that. First and last mile solutions, meaning how do you get people from their house to the train station? Mobility as a service, we've already talked about. Smart infrastructure and 5G. Smart infrastructure are these cities now, as you know, that are moving to create where everything is connected, the Internet of Things. So the buses are connected to the traffic lights, are connected to the bus stops, and it's all giving information back and forth. Contactless fares is a big one. Zero fares is another one. My good friend Robbie Mackinnon, the CEO of Kansas City Area Transit Authority, announced this year they were, along with the mayor there, they were going to go to no fares, not just contactless fares, not just cash free, but free. And now Los Angeles is looking at it. I talked last night to Phil Washington, who is the CEO of Los Angeles Metro. He chairs the Biden Transportation Transition Team. So we were talking about it, and they're moving toward not only the zero emission vehicles, which is the last one, but also the zero fares as an equity issue. Zero emission buses is the other big trend, right? Electric, CNG, hydrogen, that's happening everywhere. And here are the top 10 ways that I see transit systems really future-proofing themselves. The first is zero emission buses, like I mentioned. It helps counter that message that transit is unclean that Andy was talking about, that our uninformed politicians early on told us. Now, the studies have come out to show that actually it is safe. People are social distancing, wearing masks, all those things, and the vehicles are being cleaned probably more than the mall you're walking in or the large store. New tech tools are important, right? So instead of when a new pandemic hits or a new area problem happens in a city where you have to not have transportation go in a certain area, people need to make sure they have the right back office scenario planning tools to reroute the service and adjust their rosters and shifts quickly. Most public transit agencies, the drivers, the operators are represented by a union. They have work rules. All those work rules need to be uploaded. You need to have software so you can kind of play in a sandbox and see, what if we cut this route? What if we did that? There's no service demands over there. What happened this time was that people just went to what they call their Saturday only schedule, which is kind of operating with a meat cleaver instead of a scalpel. And you need to be able to future-proof your agency. You need to have the right technology tools in place to do just that. High frequency routes, what are they? So instead of needing a paper schedule that you have to touch, or even a regular schedule, high frequency means the bus comes like a train, like a subway, every 10 to 15 minutes. You know you can count on it. This is what many cities are moving to on their major routes and their major thoroughfares. I did this in Baltimore when I rebooted the bus network and created Baltimore Link. We took our 12, we changed our whole system, and we took the 12 highest frequency routes and the 12 heaviest used routes and turned them into high frequency. So you could just stand there and count on the bus coming. We also need software and hardware that allows for better tracking of your drivers, your assets, your buses, your rail cars, your facility cleaning, and more accurate on-yard vehicle location. Basically, you need to know where your drivers and where your vehicles are at all time. You can't rely on old radio signals. You got to be on GPS now. And then these are some of the other big trends. I want to leave time, Andy, for questions, so I'll just go through these real quickly. You can see them up on the screen. Real-time passenger info, I've already talked about it. Microtransit. What I haven't talked a lot about is online mobile trip booking. In America, we have something called the Americans with Disabilities Act, and many other countries have something similar. It creates a civil right for people with disabilities to get an individualized van service to come and pick them up at the curb in front of their house. Many cities now actually do door-to-door. Well, in order to make that happen, people have to call in and make a reservation. I ran Washington, D.C.'s reservation center for 5 years earlier in my career for WMATA, the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority. And so I had 250 people in a call center and a reservation center taking calls and dispatching elbow to elbow. You can't do that anymore if you want to future-proof. You need to be able to move people to online trip booking so they can control their own booking. They don't have to call in and make reservations. Autonomous vehicles, we've already talked about some, but these are vehicles without drivers. They're happening all over the world now, especially in a low-touch environment. This is a niche solution. It's not a solution for every route, but in some areas where maybe it's a campus-like situation or you need service 24 hours a day in a small area that's hard to get to by a big bus, these can serve a really important purpose, last mile solutions, and mobility as a service. So these are 10 ways we can future-proof our transit systems. Another way we can future-proof it is to tell our children about transit. That's exactly what I did. At the beginning of COVID, my COVID lockdown project was to write a children's book about public transportation. There it is. It's great. It's a good Christmas gift for your kids. Thank you so much.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Paul. That you have the macro view of the public transit, and you also have done it being a head of a department. So that's wonderful. And in fact, there were a question that came in. that I thought was very relevant before we move to the Q&A here. Darren McDade asked a question. Hi, Paul. Not just due to this pandemic, there will be others. How do we protect the public transit system from shocks like this in the future? More directly, should industry be investing in biosensing and real-time analysis systems for public transportation? Good question there, Darren.
Yeah, I think so. I think he's nailed it. Technology really is a key to help us future-proof, as I was just talking about. We need to know where our vehicles are. We need to know, the passengers that are on the vehicle. I think that transit agencies are realizing that. I think one other thing we can do right now to get people back on the bus is we need to have our political leaders tell people it's safe to get back on the vehicle. And I think that's going to start happening now with the, as Hannah was talking about, as we have the distribution of the vaccine. I think folks will start realizing, it's safe to get back on the vehicle. But I do think that the service offerings that public transit are going to make are going to change in the future because all the studies that I'm looking at indicate that people are not going to go back to the office 5 days a week, people that don't have to. They're going to work from home 2 to 3 days a week. And so the peaks of service in the morning and the afternoon, just like the peaks of traffic in the morning and the afternoon, are going to stay down. And so the commuter trains and the commuter buses need to start thinking about nights and weekends. We need to think about servicing families, getting into lunch in a city, or the nightlife in a city. So train service maybe, guts way back at night. Maybe now you pick it up so people can go in for restaurant reservations, et cetera, and then have their last mile solution with an Uber or Lyft or taxi to take them home, or on the weekends with ball games and tourism. So I think the market shift that we need to take in as an industry is something that a lot of transit leaders are looking at. I've talked to CEOs of transit systems from Toronto to Sydney, Australia, and the last month. They're all looking, and over to the United Kingdom as well, and here in the US, they're all looking at what comes next. And they may start offering more suburban service as a result of that. And the train service and commuter buses may adjust the timing of what they offer.
There's another question. Thank you for that answer. Very, very good. RN asks, how can you preserve passenger privacy and security?
So passenger privacy is a key issue. I know many folks want to be able to move about as they want to and not be tracked. And so as long as systems keep cameras on the buses, though, for safety, which most systems have now, you don't really have much privacy. People are going to know, and a lot of systems are moving to facial recognition software now, just like airports have done. Matter of fact, my company owns a company in South America that is doing just that for public transit, facial recognition. And so the illusion of privacy that many of us want, people say, I don't want to be tracked. Well, guess what? If you have a phone with you, you're already being tracked. And we know who has access to that tracking.
Right.
So I think, there's probably a way to make it happen, but in the future, as a result of this pandemic, it's going to be harder and harder to have that sense of privacy if you ride any public conveyance, whether it's airplanes or buses or trains.
And the privacy issue, actually, I wrote down a question for Hannah. When you've had those analytics and the other tools in the back end, how much information, is too much information to give a customer to look into your back end? I mean, yes, it's good to know when they left from, A to B. How much analytics do you provide in that in that kind of transparency?
I think it's truly a key question in supply chain, right? And especially as we get more and more consumer relevant data. Certainly in a COVID situation during the pandemic, there's a big risk of privacy going down the drain. And I think that's a thing we all need to be concerned about. I believe consumers are more and more concerned about privacy, and yet I believe that the direction of where privacy is going is the opposite. It's more and more data being shared with more and more people, right? So I think we are on our way now to everybody thinking, okay, everybody needs to know who has been vaccinated, for instance. Right. And that's a big privacy concern. Yeah. I think what's going to happen, hopefully over the next 10 years, is consumers get more and more conscious about their data. Right now, a lot of people are on website and they say, yes, just do whatever, right? I want to get on. Let me click the button that lets me pass through here. And I believe the consciousness is going to go up. And so as you're, for instance, having product with technology built in, you will start thinking about which data do I really want the manufacturer to have about my usage. So hopefully people will start thinking more about it. That's my hope.
Yeah, I concur with that. And I want to be respectful of both speakers' time. And I'd like to ask, since we are towards the end, are you open to continuing? There's a few questions here. So Hannah and Paul, would you be willing to continue?
Absolutely.
Thank you for that. Yeah, so I have questions as well, but let's get to the audience's question. Jacqueline Gordon here asks, how do fair transit systems get funded? And I know, yes, and then we go back to privacy. So with that question, you know, I was going to ask you, one of my questions, Paul, was, you know, in the recent election, there were ballot measures all across the country about should we put more money into transit? And if you look around, again, ridership is down, but that is such an important infrastructure for every city. So much has been invested. How do you answer that question?
Yeah, so you're right. Over 90, according to APTA, more than 90% of the questions that were on the ballot this year for funding of transportation passed. I think it's clear that people in America at least realize that public transit, as you said, is an important infrastructure component. It also now, in this era of equity being considered, if we look at the ridership of most public transit systems, a lot of them are people that are in poverty. A lot of people are using it to get to jobs, kind of the what they were calling essential jobs during the peak of COVID. I don't like that title because I think all work is essential, but I think we know what they mean, right? The jobs that are essential for our economy to continue to turn. Really, a lot of those folks ride transit. That's why when they said, everybody stop riding transit, unless you're an essential worker, most cities still had 50 to 60% ridership, because look who the bulk of your riders are. They're not what they're called choice riders, but they're people that need this transit. And so I think we're going to see a continued investment in transit for cities who are going to fare free. I've asked that same question, right? How do you do that? How do you make up the lack of fare? So one of the ways to do that is an increased subsidy. And they're finding ways, new schemes or new ways to add in funding for transit agencies, such as advertising on video, entertainment video on vehicles. That's something big that's just happened in the last few years, where you get on a bus and there's a TV, a TV in there, basically a screen. And in addition to providing information about the service, you're seeing advertisements. Or at shelters, instead of just seeing the a poster up there, you may now see an electronic television kind of thing with scrolling advertisements on there. So transit agencies are being creative in ways that they're increasing their funding. For Kansas City, for instance, for them, fares only were about 12% of their, let's call it fare box recovery ratio of their total budget. So it's a little bit easier for them. For some transit systems that have a 40 or 50% fare box recovery ratio, they probably would not be able to go fare free right now. Yeah. So it's a political question. It's a policy question. Yeah. And part of the reason why we're going fare free are exactly those questions, political and policy questions.
Right. Now, where there's certainly money, there's worth politics. And I subscribe to kind of what Hannah had said earlier is, if you can measure it, you can either make money or save money. Right. And that's where all this technology, wireless connectivity is coming in. There was a question from our Ren again regarding privacy and government solutions. I think that we've kind of mostly said that already based on your answers. So I'd like to ask a question, with the uptake in delivery services, everybody knows about the DoorDash and Uber Eats. That's, people ordering that. So their business has gone up. Downtick in the ride sharing, Uber and Lyft. Do you think, and starting with Hannah, do you think these two services will recover or go back to pre-COVID levels? Or do you think that industry is what we see today is what's going to be there tomorrow?
Oh, I'm not an expert on on transportation issues. I'll leave that to Paul.
Well, the DoorDash and Uber Eats,
DoorDash and Uber Eats, I absolutely feel that there are a number of things that we've learned during COVID, right? And one of them is the convenience of stuff showing up on our doorstep. So much as we all want to go out and see three-dimensional people on and off, right? We also like to get our convenience. So I do believe that e-commerce levels are, e-commerce essentially skipped 3 or 4 years of development, of growth, and just fast forwarded, right? And that's why you're seeing some delivery service issues, etc. here before the holidays. And that's because people really like the convenience. It's going to stay up there, right? You know, it's, and I think the same is going to happen with DoorDash and Uber Eats, just because we've gotten used to the convenience.
It's here. Yeah, it's definitely here to stay. And then, you know, to Paul, you know, I guess it's pretty obvious regarding the Uber and Lyft ridership is down. How are cities using different, I guess, transport modes, or, you know, other than the buses and rails, to really move people around? Because I don't, at least when I got into this industry, I didn't know there were paratransits, and they have their own taxi cabs, and they have all these other, you know, ways to move its citizens around. Maybe you can share some of that. What are cities doing today, kind of micromobility that maybe most don't know about?
Yeah, you know, it's funny, switching back over to Africa for a minute, so much of what's happening in African cities is really the private sector running their own little shuttle services. Here in the US, we call them jitneys. I was talking to the CEOs of 2 transit systems over there in the last month, and both of them said the majority of mobility, public mobility in your city, is run by private companies who basically have the ability to say, okay, I'm just gonna run my 11-passenger little minibus around and pick people up at these bus stops.
Huh.
Here in the US, that's not as much happening here, obviously. In Great Britain, in the United Kingdom, outside of London, that still is the case. Wow. Private companies establish what the route is they want to be. They establish what their fares are going to be, their timetable. Then they submit that for approval of the local transportation commissioner. Then they just run that route. Here in the US, what's happened instead is public transit agencies are government entities or quasi-government entities, right? So I worked for a state agency, the Maryland Transit Administration. But right next door to me in Washington, D.C., it's a standalone transit authority, just like in Philadelphia, SEPTA, the Southeast Pennsylvania Transportation Authority, designed to cover more than one political jurisdiction or an area. And so those agencies have provided all the main bus, light rail, subway system, commuter train, commuter bus, and paratransit services for a city. In the last 10 years, private players have come in, right? The Ubers, the Lyfts, the Vias that I mentioned before, these micro transit providers. And now in the last 2 or 3 years, they were really running at odds with one another. But in the last 2 or 3 years, we've seen them come together in a blending. And I think that's what we're going to see going forward. Public transit agencies will decide, you know what? We don't need to be all things to all people at all times. We can focus on core routes and maybe some key commuter routes and allow these private sector players to come in and fill in the gaps. And we can even all come together and provide multi-layered solutions on these mobility as a service phone apps, where you can see all the options in a city like Dallas does, and you can decide, do I want to go there quicker or do I want to go there cheaper? And it'll give you the options and let you choose. And then with one push of a button on your account, you'll pay for all of them. And you can then have an Uber pick you up at your house, take you to the train station, you ride downtown, and then from there you get on a bike and you take it the last 3 blocks to your office. That's the new future of mobility that I see happening.
So
and Andy, may I amend my answer also before, because I'm concerned that everybody's going out to buy the new stock in DoorDash and things like that. So I'm talking about delivery services in general, not just Uber Eats and DoorDash, right? And I think the delivery services in general are going to stay up there, but I also think that we're going to see more robotic deliveries. I mean, this is an area where when you look at the last 5 years, big strides has been made in making deliveries via robotic vehicle. And I think we are going to see that, right? So it's not really a self-driving car, but it could be, for instance, an isolated vehicle delivery robot where you are unlocking your part via a code that you got, and you're getting your part out, and it's heated while it's underway or cooled, as the case may be, and you get it delivered. So whether those 2 companies that you mentioned as examples are going to be the ones delivering those solutions, I don't know.
No, that's very insightful. Yeah, I mean, we've always read the news that Amazon's doing their own drone fleet and testing it out. And in China, you know, there's like a drop spot where you get your e-commerce deliveries, and they drop it so much that the grass is, you know, dead because all these packages keep going to the same target. So yeah, that day may come, you know, and it you know, it certainly has an effect on how we do things, and everything is digital. And you know, this phone is the world's greatest remote, right? And that might be the case. So I'll ask just maybe two more questions to wrap up you know, our wonderful talk. And this is the fun part for me, and to kind of really get your take on it. So going to let's talk about COVID one more time, because it is, you know, a topic that's all in our minds and our hearts this year. We mentioned the vaccine transport. We heard Pfizer says that it has to be like minus 70 C, which is ridiculously cold. And you mentioned earlier, Hannah, that the transportation part of it, we can move stuff, but you feel that the maybe the infrastructure or the technology to move that around, is there going to be a run up on dry ice business? Should we all buy dry ice now? How do you see that improve?
Oh, that already happened. The run up on dry ice already happened, right? And you know, a lot happened just as we started shipping more food around. But certainly, it's been absolutely crazy. Just like the more reliable, newer cold storage facilities. You know, we've known of this problem for 6 months, and a lot of people have been proactive out there in the supply chain space. And you know, the thing when you're in supply chain, you're a big planner, right? It's all about planning, and the more you know about the future, the more data you have that you can rely on, the happier you are, of course. So we've known about this problem for a long time, so you can plan for that. The thing that is right now concerning to me is the political process and how this is being distributed, which again, we could have planned a long time ago, right? But the vaccines that are coming on the tail end on this, that are in the pipeline, have a little bit less stringent supply chain requirements. And so we are all very hopeful that we'll get different levels. So I get the sense that a lot of people in this meeting are from the US, but we are equally concerned, seen from a supply chain standpoint, about what happens in third world countries. So if you say the goal is that we get a vaccine out to all parts of the continent of Africa, the supply chain issues of having something that needs to be even somewhat cold is huge. So there are a number of other vaccines that hopefully we can get distributed at those places. And that's what we need to do in order for the world to be healed. And I think with the interaction that we're used to, unless the world gets healed, we are all in trouble.
Yeah, those are wise words. Yeah, I do see that there needs to be a little bit faster, right? Because our economy needs it, you know, and our families need it. And to that, Paul, kind of last question here. I was fascinated the fact that, you know, you are talking to heads of transportation in Nigeria and Tanzania, and, you know, the U.S. is considered a more developed country. And, you know, your statement earlier was very intriguing. You know, what about cities outsourcing the bus system and all these type of things? So how do those countries compare to it? Are they behind, ahead, more nimble than the way, and, you know, with all the politics going on here, how is their transportation system going?
So as you mentioned, Andy, it's different in different parts of the world, right? So they're just building out their infrastructure with the help of the World Bank in many cities and countries in Africa. The ones I'm talking to are involved in big building capital projects. You know, they're building bus rapid transit lines and light rail lines. We don't see that much construction going on right now currently in the US, and that's because capital budgets have had to basically stop their capital projects, their bricks and mortar and their building projects. As their operating dollars are running thin, some agencies are taking from their capital budgets to subsidize their operating dollars where it's legally permissible. In places like Australia, they're really focused on rail and underground rail. There's big, massive rail projects going on right now in Sydney. My friend Howard Collins is one of the, used to be head of Sydney Rail, and now he's been promoted to head of all of New South Wales, their deputy director, and they're involved in a big underground. They've actually made a TV show about it that's very popular in Australia, about digging the underground tunnel for their subway system. And then you go to the United Kingdom, and some of those major cities there that I talked about outside of London are changing the rules, and they want to get away from provider-led directed service to more of the London model, or the model here in the US, where we contract out for service using requests for proposals or tenders. Here in the United States, as transit agencies are looking at potentially cutting service, the big contracting companies like TransDev, First Transit, MV, Keolis, RITP Dev, National Express, those big companies are saying to the public transit industry, don't just cut these routes. Let the private sector come in and let us have a look at those routes. Put out an RFI, a request for information, and let us propose to you a better way, maybe a more efficient way. So you don't have to just cut the service to those people. Maybe if you need to save $100 million, we can come in and do service at a more efficient, more economical rate, and show you new ways to do it, where you can use new technology that we've been talking about tonight in order to make sure you're still providing the underlying service that's necessary to the public.
Yeah, well, awesome. I mean, I've learned just in the hour or so with you guys, and I know our audience has learned a lot as well. So excuse me. So yeah, with that, I want to thank you, Hannah Kane, Paul Comfort, the queen and king of supply chain and public transit, as I call it, and I really appreciate your insights. So with that, I'm going to go back to the slide here to share with you how to get in contact with Hannah and Paul. So let me do that right now here. Okay, great. Hopefully you can see my screen there. Yeah, so please get in touch if there's any questions or any thoughts. There was some interesting conversation there. And then Mitchell, of course, from IoT Nation has put in his code. And with that, I do want to remind everyone that WCA is a 501c nonprofit, and events like these are made possible from generous donations from our sponsors. So if your company has a charitable matching program, please consider donating at wca.org/support us. And with that, I'd like to close the meeting. And I don't know, Peter, if you have any last words before we sign off here. And I'll just leave this last slide in case any of you want some entertainment for the COVID days. You know, my band here, facebook.com/Midnight Ramblers, is happy to do it to help you have a lively event. So thank
you so much. Final words from WCA, Peter Walter, President. Thank you so much, Hannah and Paul, for the wonderful and great information about transportation in this little bit crazy time. We learned a lot. Again, how we can solve the problems and other people solve the problem also. Hopefully it will be a little bit better in 2021. We definitely have learned also with this pandemic how to use the tools correctly. It's a positive thing also. We see it just even here at WCA. We have never thought about this, have Zoom meetings reach the world. We were limited for 26 years now for Silicon Valley, and now we reach the world. So on one hand, thank you very much for the pandemic. Thank you to Zoom, definitely, to make it work. And we will continue also in the future. We may have kind of hybrid meetings in the future, but definitely it will be always a Zoom meeting and a Zoom transmission, even we go back to live events. With this, thank you so much. Happy holidays. Andy, perhaps some tunes at the end of the show. For a few minutes, and if you want to follow up with the speakers, with myself, with WCA, do so. We are happy for each contact, for each suggestions for the future.
Thank you. Have a good rest of the year, guys. Thank you, Hannah, and thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Andy.
Here come old flat top, he come grooving up slowly. Got juju eyeball and one holy roller. Got head down to his knee. Got to be maker just to do what he
Correct.
pleased.
I think we're signing off, Peter.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everybody. Happy holidays, happy New Year, and see you in January.
All right. Bye.
Take care, everybody.